Hello, thank you for participating in the Rochester City School District's presentation on your responsibilities to report child abuse. By the end of this presentation, you will know the legal requirements for reporting child abuse, the district's policies and procedures related to child abuse reporting, some signs of child abuse to look out for, and additional resources that you can use. Employees of school districts must comply with two separate laws related to child abuse reporting. 1. Article 23B of the Education Law, and 2. Article 6, Title 6 of the New York State Social Services Law. Why do we have two laws? Because they apply in different situations. Article 23B applies to child abuse in an educational setting, while Social Services Law applies to child abuse or neglect by a parent or person responsible for the child. Under both statutes, it is a crime to fail to report as required. Let's talk about the education law first. Article 23B requires that all school personnel who hold a teaching or administrative certification or other professional license must report child abuse in an educational setting. You should note that the district requires that all employees notify the building principal if they suspect or receive an allegation of child abuse by a coworker, volunteer, or contractor, regardless of whether they're required to report under the law. What is child abuse in an educational setting? It is abuse by a district employee, contracted service provider, or volunteer. Abuse includes the intentional or reckless infliction of physical injury, serious physical injury, or death, or the risk of causing any of those three things. It also includes child sex abuse or the dissemination of indecent materials to a minor. Abuse must be reported even if it occurs outside of district property. So how do you make a report? If you are not the building principal or superintendent, you should complete the New York State Education Department Child Abuse Report Form and personally deliver it to the building principal of the school for the student in which the abuse occurs and the student's principal if they are different. You should note that you have this obligation even if the child attends another district and/or the abuse occurs in another district. The form for making a report is included with the materials for this presentation. If you are a building principal, you have additional responsibilities. First, you are responsible for receiving reports of child abuse in an educational setting from employees of the district, or if you receive the allegations directly, to complete the child abuse report form. Second, you must notify the Office of Safety and Security and our legal department that an allegation has been made. Third, you must ensure that an alleged abuser is removed during any investigation to ensure the safety of the child. Fourth, you must notify the parent or person in a parental relationship if there is a reasonable suspicion that abuse has occurred. You must report the allegation to the superintendent, and you must report the allegation to the police. Principals must report an allegation of child abuse in an educational setting as soon as they have reasonable suspicion to believe that it might be true. Of course, you might need the result of an investigation before you can determine this. A principal should consult with the legal department when determining if a report should be made to ensure all steps are taken appropriately. The superintendent has an independent duty to ensure that reports of child abuse in an educational setting are reported to the police. However, a principal cannot say, "I thought the superintendent was going to report." They must make their own separate report or ensure that a report is jointly made. The superintendent is also required to notify the state education department of any child abuse by a certified or licensed employee. Again, failure to report allegations of child abuse in an educational setting where you have reasonable suspicion of abuse is a crime. It's a Class A misdemeanor, punishable by up to a year in prison, $5,000 in civil penalties, potential revocation of your certification or license if you have it, and there could be civil liability, meaning you could be involved in a lawsuit. If you report allegations where there is reasonable suspicion, even if they end up being false, you will not be liable for making a report. The statute expressly protects individuals who make good faith reports. Now let's talk about mandatory reporting under the Social Services Law. Now, the Social Services Law is the statute that creates what is usually referred to as the mandatory reporting requirement. There are several differences between the Education Law and the Social Services Law. First, the list of people who are mandatory reporters is longer and includes individuals who are not necessarily employed by schools. For district employees, however, the list is essentially the same: any employee with a license or certification. But please note, even if you are not a mandatory reporter, you may report suspected child abuse to the confidential hotline. If you are not a mandatory reporter and are uncertain about what to do, tell your building principal or supervisor. The second difference between Article 23B of the Education Law and mandatory reporting is that mandatory reporters must report abuse or maltreatment by a parent or person legally responsible for a child under the age of 18. As opposed to abuse by a district employee, volunteer, or contractor. You should note that person legally responsible could be someone living in the home, even if not the parent or legal guardian. Third, mandatory reporters must report abuse and maltreatment, which includes neglect, including educational neglect. Abuse is the infliction or allowing physical injury or risk of physical injury that causes a substantial risk of death, disfigurement, or impairment of a physical, emotional health, or loss of impairment or a function of any bodily organ. Abuse also includes the commission or allowing of a commission of child sex offense, including child prostitution or pornography against a child. Maltreatment and neglect for a child under the age of 18 is any child whose physical, mental, or emotional condition is impaired or in imminent danger of becoming impaired as a result of the failure of the parent or person legally responsible for his care to exercise a minimum degree of care, such as failing to provide food, clothing, or medical treatment, educational neglect, failure to provide supervision due to excessive corporal punishment, misuse of drugs, or misusing alcohol. Fourth, mandatory reporters must report suspected child abuse that is learned while working in their professional capacity. The simplest example for this is that you would have to file a report if a student told you her parent hit her, but you would not have to file a report if you were walking down the street and saw someone hit a child on the other side of the street. Fifth, mandatory reporters must make a report to the Child Abuse Hotline. The numbers for the New York State and Monroe County child abuse hotlines are contained in this slide. Once a mandatory reporter calls the hotline, they must then immediately inform a person in charge, who is their supervisor or the superintendent, and they must follow up within 48 hours and send a written report on the appropriate form to the Monroe County Child Protective Services. Again, this form is included with the materials attached to this presentation. What happens if you fail to make a report when required? Again, failing to make a report is a Class A misdemeanor and punishable by up to a year in jail. It could potentially result in the revocation of certification or licensure. You could be responsible for civil liabilities or a lawsuit due to your failure to report. If you make a good faith report, even if you are wrong, the statute expressly protects you, and your report is confidential. So what are some signs of child abuse or maltreatment? Some indicators of physical abuse can include injuries to the eyes or both sides of the head or body. Accidental injuries typically only affect one side of the body. Frequently impairing injuries such as bruises, cuts, and/or burns, especially if the child is unable to provide an adequate explanation of the cause. Disruptive or aggressive behavior by the student. Passive, withdrawn, or emotionless behavior on the part of the student. Fear of going home, fear of parents, or fear of a particular employee in the district. Indicators of maltreatment can include obvious malnourishment, listlessness or fatigue, stealing or begging for food, lack of personal care, untreated need for glasses, dental care, or other medical attention, frequent absences or tardiness from school, and the child inappropriately left unattended or without supervision. Indicators of sexual abuse can include symptoms of sexually transmitted diseases, injuries to genital areas, difficulty or pain while sitting or walking, sexually suggestive, inappropriate, or promiscuous behavior or verbalization by children, expressing age-inappropriate knowledge of sexual relationships, and sexual victimization of other children. You should know that these lists are not all-inclusive. They contain some common indicators as described by the Monroe County Child Protective Services. Some abused or maltreated children may not show any of these symptoms. So what are the requirements in the Rochester City School District? We require full compliance with the education law and the social services law. All allegations of child abuse, maltreatment, or neglect must be reported to the building principal and the superintendent, even if committed by someone other than a district employee or parent or guardian. All allegations of child abuse, maltreatment, or neglect must be investigated to determine if there is reasonable suspicion to believe abuse has occurred, and all suspected child abuse must be reported to the parent or guardian unless the parent or guardian is the suspected abuser or is participating or allowing the abuse. Failure to follow the district requirements will result in disciplinary action against the individual who fails to comply with our policies and procedures. The forms referenced above are included with this presentation. They include the Child Abuse Report Form for Education Law 23B report, information about parental rights and responsibilities and procedures under Article 23B of the Education Law, our summary guide for mandatory reporters under Social Services Law, the Social Services Law Mandatory Reporter Report Form, the district's regulations regarding reporting of child abuse. You can also visit the Mandated Reporter Resource Center online training at the link below and Monroe County Child Protective Services website, dorightbykids.org, which provides additional information regarding child abuse reporting and detecting child abuse. Thank you for your attention and commitment to our students. Have a wonderful day.